on swiftly and introduce Ian, who can share a screen. So just to repeat, really, that Ian is known as the planning geek, and he's got a fantastic website which I use myself all the time, and I know what a great amount of knowledge Ian's got. So we're very lucky to have him along this evening. Ian, do you want to unmute yourself?
Mute, there we go, just unmuted.
Yeah, there you go. Can hear you fine, Ian.
Good. Let me just double click that. Right, you should now see my screen, hopefully.
Yeah, so we've got the slide on the left and we've got you on the right, so that's perfect.
Good, excellent, lovely. All right, great, lovely. Well, good evening, everybody. And if you find me looking from one side to the other, it's just I have three screens in front of me, so it's just I've got information on all three. So I can see the box, the chat things over on my right, so I can see it if necessary. But yeah, and we will give this a go. So my talk tonight is called Your Essential Guide, How to Take Advantage of the Changes Before Others Do.
Perfect.
And and that's all working fine. So
are you happy to take questions as we go along, Ian?
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We've got quite a few slides, so I tend to go fairly rapidly. Just depends whether you want to sort of finish at 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. really, basically. It's your choice, I don't mind,
5 is fine, don't worry, I'm sure we've been enthralled.
Anyway, right, so who am I? My name's Ian Walmsley, and I'm a developer who absolutely loves planning. I've got a few brands. Planning Geek is the one I'm talking about tonight. Land Company, which is sourcing sites around the UK. Leading Homes is my development arm. I've also got a thing called Travel Geek, and I now have a podcast called Property on Fire. And I've got a development pipeline of over £40 million GDV in development. So yeah, it's going fairly well. So Planning Geek. I started this back in 2017 as I was rather fed up with all the inaccurate information on the interwebby thing. It really was bad in those days, and there was a lot of poor information. So I decided the best way to do it was create a site, and now I possibly have the largest planning website in the world, well over 200 pages, as long as one discounts a national portal anyway. I now offer appraisals from a developer's set of eyes. I undertake site visits for clients, and I'm also a mentor as well as an educator, talking to groups such as this, and also some private companies and mentoring groups as well around the UK. And the good thing about COVID is it means I don't have to drive up and down the M5 and everything else, because I'm actually in the southwest, so it means I can avoid the M4 and such delights like that. Just a little bit of a disclaimer stroke warning. Legislation does alter regularly, so please do rely upon a good website. In 2020 alone, there was no fewer than 6 updates to the GPDO, and we're expecting a new one in July of 2021. So things are altering all the time, but I deal in facts. I don't deal in what may or may not come. I deal in what you can do today, and how the alterations may affect you today. So I will be talking fairly fast. There's a lot of content, and your mind may well be blown. So I apologise for that in advance.
While you're talking about blowing minds, so you might have to be careful with the acronyms. That was all.
Don't worry. Don't panic.
Okay.
Don't panic. Don't panic. Don't panic, Chris. Don't panic, Chris.
I'm not.
All right. as a just a little bit of disclaimer there. So basically, do your own risks, please, and checks and everything else. So although I do carry PI insurance like most professionals. So what are we going to cover tonight? The use class order and the general permitted development order. And just for Chris's benefit, I've put in another slide here, glossary. Okay, the problem is with us in planning and development, and I'm sure it also applies to brokers and everything else. We do like TLAs, or three-letter acronyms. So the GPDO, which I purposely didn't translate at the time, and that actually stands for the General Permitted Development Order, and currently it is 2015 as amended. And the use.
Sorry, the slide I can see has got Planning Geek on. So have you moved on from that? I just want to make sure that we're seeing.
Should say glossary on it.
No. So mine doesn't. I was just a bit concerned that you'd moved on and the screen hasn't moved on. That was all.
Odd. Okay, let's stop it and. So which one you could see? Probably the one with glasses on top, saying Planning Geek.
That's right. Yeah, and I think Ryan said exactly the same thing actually.
That's a bit weird. I apologise.
It started perfectly. I just didn't want you to get too far, and we were.
No. I'm glad on that. I apologise. Let me restart. So hopefully you can now see that. Can you?
Just give it a minute. I can't see anything at the moment. I can just see you.
That's a little bit weird as to
why it's not shared, is it?
Sorry, Linda.
I just said the screen. He hasn't shared. He's come off sharing his screen. It needs to go back onto sharing screen.
Stop sharing screen, is it? Sorry about that. Joys of Zoom.
Yeah. So we've gone back to the Planning Geek with the first bullet, Ian.
So can you see started in 2017?
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
So okay, so I'm just going to skip through these lines. I hopefully they are now appearing. So apologies for that. I don't quite know what happened there. And then we just come on to the disclaimer warning sign. So hopefully that's and now you can see where I talked about the mind blowing.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Can you see that now? Can you on screen? Yes.
Yes. That's perfect, Ian. Thank you.
Good. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened there. Joys of computers, eh? So so we're going to talk about use class orders and the GPDO and glossary. So as I said earlier, we do a lot of TLAs, or three-letter acronyms, in property. GPDO stands for General Permitted Development Order 2015 as amended. Use class, that is a classification of any building in England. Date stamped, the date when a building had to exist or have a particular use. Prior approval, which is a 56-day application for certain parts of the GPDO. A story ought to be self-explanatory, but that is a floor of building above or, importantly, below ground. NIMBY, not in my backyard, or YIMBY, which is the one we actually prefer, I think, yes, in my backyard, and that is an actual campaign group. And if you ever get confused and you do not understand, there are over 400 more of these at my website, so planninggeek.co.uk/glossary.
I do use that glossary and I find it really useful.
Good. Well, there's an awful lot there, an awful lot of words which people, some of the times they're afraid to look up or afraid to ask as to what things mean. So right, first of all, we're going to go through what were the old use classes, because they are still relevant. Use class A was businesses which serve people. Use class B, businesses which supply or support others. Use class C, locations where people sleep. Use class D, locations where they don't and everything else is sui generis, which is locations that are unique in themselves. However, in September, the government made some updates to the use class order, and we now have a part of use class B. Most of it's gone. So businesses which supply or support others. Use class C, nothing's really altered in that. So that's where people sleep. HMOs, residential, care locations, stuff like that. And then we have use class E, which is commercial, business and service. Use class F1, nothing about to do with car racing, that learning and non-residential institutions. Use class F2, local community uses, and we still have, of course, sui generis, so everything else that's unique in themselves. Right, changes that have happened within it. So pubs, they've actually moved from A4 now to sui generis, as has hot food takeaways. So both of those are now sui generis and are no longer A4 or A5. However, with hot food takeaways, if you see one that is closed or one that you could probably buy and convert, you can still use within the GPDO class A to go to a shop or financial, and then actually use anything class E, which I'll come on to in a minute. You can still use class M to go to residential, and you can still use class JA to go to offices, and then any use in class E. So there are two routes to go to other uses within class E, and for various reasons one might be easier than the other. However, until the 31st July 2021, so this end of this July, the GPDO will refer to the old use classes. So in effect, we have two use classes systems running side by side, which can get a little bit confusing for people, but that's why I go through both of them, just in case you still see some people referring to A1, A2, etc. But to all intents and purposes, they have now gone. Some of the other changes that happened, so cinemas, music halls, bingo halls and dance halls, they have all become a lot more protected and are now sui generis, which also means that those can no longer change from one to the other. So quite often we've seen in the past, cinemas have gone to bingo halls, for example. Well, now they're all protected and you can't do that without planning permission. There's a quick URL, and if you go to useclass.co.uk, which is easy to remember, you will go to the use class order on my website. So a nice quick link for you there. Right, use class E. I love this. Commercial, business and service. Now, this now contains shops, banks, estate agents, restaurants, cafes, offices, research and development, light industrial, doctors, clinics, health centres, creches, day nurseries and day centres. And there's more, gymnasiums, indoor sports and recreation. All of those are now in use class E. Now, as I said earlier, it's commercial, business and service. And the one good thing is you can interchange between any of those uses whenever you want, because it's not development, and you can alter them even in parts of the day. So in other words, you could have multiple uses. So perhaps you have a restaurant and the restaurant is obviously empty during the day. So that could be in offices, that could be hot desking during the day with a cafe, something like that. And the one good thing about use class E is the fact that you can now convert any of those in it to a shop or financial location and use class G above. And I'll come on to class G in a minute, actually. So I will come on to that as to what use class G is. But essentially, anything that is in use class E, you can now convert to a residential using use class G. So I've said there, perhaps we look at banks. Quite often banks that have closed have got a couple of floors above them, so they can now be converted under Class G as long as it's ancillary. However, anything external may still require planning permission, and if you're going to say convert from a shop to a restaurant and put in a flue, an external flue, for example, you will need planning for that as well. So just be aware of that. So just to recap on use Class E, they are shops, banks, estate agents, restaurants, cafes, offices, research and development, light industrial, doctors, clinics, health centres, creches, day nurseries, day centres, gymnasiums, indoor sports and recreation. So all of those are interchangeable. So if we find a gym that doesn't reopen, you could perhaps convert that to a restaurant, cafe, or hot desking, or whatever you like. So it's not development. You do not need to tell a local authority. You can just go ahead and do it without passing go. Right, Class F1, which is learning and non-residential institutions. This starts now getting a little bit more protected for obvious reasons. So in this, we've got schools and colleges, which used to be D1. We've got art galleries, we've got museums, public libraries, public halls, except local halls, and churches are all now Class F1. They are more protected. You can't really go from any of these to anything else without planning, but again, you can swap between the uses within it. So in theory, you could go from a church to a museum or an art gallery still. So you could still do that without troubling the local authority. Right, Class F2 is local community uses. Now, these are going to be even more protected, and I doubt we'll see any permitted development in the future on these, and you'll probably find resistance in planning as well going forward. One thing that has moved into Class F2 is shops of less than 200 square meters with no other similar shop within a 1 kilometer radius. They were previously A1, they're now protected. This is aimed to protect those shops that are supporting local communities. Local halls and meeting places, they're now F2 as well. And outdoor sports outdoor areas for sports and recreation, as well as swimming pools and skating rinks. Those are all going to be protected now, and you're going to need planning to do anything. And as I said before, you'll probably find resistance even from the local authority if you try and alter anything. However, again, it's not development, and you can still interchange between them. So whether you can make a skating rink, I don't know. Whether you can have dual uses on that, I don't know. But all of these use classes, if you're a little bit, think outside the box, you may well think of a few opportunities to actually take advantage. Right, General Permitted Development Order 2015, as amended. This is so important. Please do not go and download the 2015 copy of the development order. It is woefully out of date because there's been 6 last year, and we're expecting probably another couple this year before it gets replaced. It is updated on a very regular basis. The good thing is that my site is always bang up to date, so do not have any fear. But please, if you go and look at the original one, you will see you can convert pubs to residential. You can't. So building operations. What is development? These are things like building operations, so structural alterations, construction, groundworks, and then material changes of land and buildings, and the subdivision of a building if you create more than one residential unit. So if you split a house into flats, that is development and will need planning permission. So anything like that. However, conversely, and probably what is more importantly, what is not development, and this is everything that you can just get on and do. Interior alterations, except if you're putting in a mezzanine floor. Loft conversions in most cases. Change of use. So if you're going, a couple of examples there, if you're going from post office to a hairdresser's or office to a restaurant, they're all now in use Class E, so you can just go ahead and do that without troubling the authorities. Or the division of a building into multiple commercial units, and we will come on to that in a minute, and as to why that can be very, very, very useful. Right, main elements of the GPDO. Excuse me whilst I just take a sip of this, because my mouth will get dry otherwise.
Yeah, that's all really good. Thanks for that. I when you talked about not development, Ian, I wondered whether you were going to talk about sort of summer houses. You know, they seem very popular these days, particularly with home working. You know, people put in sort of quite nice offices in the garden as well.
I will briefly mention that in a second for you, Chris.
Starman, thank you.
So there we go. Right, so the main elements of the GPDO. Schedule 2 Part 1 is development within the curtilage of a house. Part 2 is for minor alterations. So if you paint your house, put up a fence, put up, say, CCTV, that is all covered under Part 2. Part 3 is changes of use. And Part 20 is airspace. There are another 16 parts to Schedule 2, which is where the bulk of the GPDO is. And that includes temporary buildings, non-domestic extensions, heritage demolition, communications, and even what the Queen can and cannot do at her establishments is even covered in the GPDO. The GPDO is your planning permission. If it's in there, that you've already got the planning permission to go ahead. However, on some cases, you will need prior approval, but the GPDO is your planning permission. So if you ever get asked, especially with Part 1, where was your planning permission, you could actually just show them a copy of the GPDO and say, here it is. Now, another quick link for you, if you go to gpdo.co.uk, guess what, you'll go to the part of my website where that is included. So right, development within the curtilage of a house, and this is where Chris's point comes into it. Right, it's broken down into 9 parts here. We have extensions, which are Class A. We've got Class AA, which is a new one where you can actually build 1 or more stories on top of a house. We've got Class B, that's where you do dormers. Class C is where you put Velux windows. Again, that's permitted development and subject to certain restrictions. You can go ahead and do that as well. Porch is a Class D, and outbuildings. Now, that was what Chris was talking about a second ago. It's the outbuildings that you can put into your garden for home office, for gyms, as long as it is incidental to the enjoyment of the house. In other words, as long as the residents of the house have a benefit from that, then it is covered under Class E. And you can cover your curtilage, so the land surrounding your house, front, back and sides, by up to 50% of it being covered with outbuildings, garages, extensions, stuff like that. So you can go up to that. There are various criteria. All of this is on my website. So if you go to gpdo.co.uk, and then you can just navigate to the outbuildings, or to be honest, just put Class E Planning Geek and you'll go straight there in Google. Class F is driveways, chimneys and flues, dwelling house and G. And even if Sky come and put up a dish on your house, that's covered under Class H, and some definitions which are probably just as important. I'm only going to cover one of these tonight, and that is Class AA, which is additional stories on a house or bungalow. So you can add on a house, you can go up by another 2 stories if you want. So it's up to a maximum of 7 meters. Or if you've got a bungalow, you can go up by another 3.5 meter with 1 additional story. So in other words, you make it from a bungalow to a house. And actually, you can even use this on a semi or a terraced house, going up by another 3.5 meters if it is. However, importantly, you can't have had any previous upwards extensions, and you will need a 56-day prior approval application. And it is going to be assessed against overlooking, privacy, loss of light, and air traffic control, because you probably don't want a flashing red light or green light or whatever on the top of your house that you've just built upwards. It's probably not a good idea. So air traffic control will have a bearing, especially when it is close to an airport. However, you cannot do this on converted properties that you've already converted. Perhaps you've done it under Class O to go to a number of houses from an office block. So unfortunately, you can't then go up another couple of stories. There are, within the airspace Part 2020, there are options for that. And unfortunately, if you run HMOs, you can't convert that house to an HMO without getting full planning, I'm afraid. And as you might expect, you can't also do this in conservation areas, areas of outstanding natural beauty, triple SIs, World Heritage Sites, Norfolk, Suffolk Broads, etc. However, Greenbelt is okay. Now, Greenbelt is not mentioned at all in the GPDO. Therefore, any of this is quite possible in Greenbelt areas, as long as it's not in the designated area. So if it's Greenbelt and it's an AONB, area of outstanding natural beauty, you can't do it. But if it is just Greenbelt, you can. And I think really this sort of upwards extension is going to be more suitable for properties that are not cheap by jowl to other houses and everything else. So I think we can forget modern housing estates, to be honest, even if they are built between 1st July 1948 and the 28th of October 2018, which is the criteria for the dates. 1st July 1948, by the way, was when planning started in the UK. And there is always a cut-off date or a date stamp, as I mentioned earlier, which in this case is the end of October 18, which is when this would have been first announced. Now at the moment, there is no fees for it. So apart from perhaps drawings or architects or whatever, those sorts of fees, or planning consultants may be, you won't have any other fees to actually pay. Now, the good thing is this can be done in conjunction with Part 1, which is extensions. So you can go out as well as up. So in theory, you can take your bungalow, you can then put a single story on top of that bungalow, and then you can put a double story extension out the back, and you could probably put a single extension on either side if you wanted as well. So all of a sudden you are going up and out and everything else. So you're going to take your bungalow, and you are going to make your bungalow into a rather large house. So you know, so I think that is possible. If you got the land, then that is an option. All right, you'll need prior approval to go up, but everything else is just permitted development, and you can just go ahead and enlarge, subject to the criteria on your screen and on the website. Right, changes of use. Okay, so this is where you're probably a little bit more used to it. So often this is just referred to commercial to resi. However, there has been a few alterations over the last year, and I'm just going to go through some of these. So you're now going to require floor plans for your commercial to resi. I'm just finishing off, it's not finishing off at all. I'm about 3 years into a very large residential conversion down in Devon. Currently got 22 flats almost completed, but I didn't have to put floor plans in. You do now, and you now have to put elevations as well. And also now you will need natural light to all habitable rooms. So this is sort of bedrooms and lounges, but not dedicated kitchens. Those do not need natural light. You will need a flood risk assessment if it's required, and this also applies if you're in a critical drainage area. You could be in Class 1 for flood risk, but you will still need a risk assessment if you are. And more importantly, as from the 6th of April, you will need minimum space standards for any conversions. So if you want to avoid that, then you will need to get in pretty rapidly. And if you're converting under M, N or Q, which we'll come on to in a second, you can include all the external building works that are required under that. And of course, the local authority will want to know where the site is, so a location plan as well. Right, Class G, said I would mention it. Shops or restaurants, so shops or financial, which used to be A1, A2 to mixed use. So what this basically means is you can take your shop and you can put 2 flats above, as long as the shop has been in existence since March 2013 and combines, and you can combine, if the shop's been in use, you can then combine Class M as well, which I'll come on to in a minute. And you can also combine with Class L, which you may be familiar with is going from C3 to C4. Now, the good thing here, I mentioned earlier what is not development, and that is dividing a commercial unit into 2, 3, 4. So if you're older like myself, you will remember Woolworths or similar large stores. Well, if they've got sort of parts of the shop above, you can divide that into multiple shops, and then above each shop you can put two flats. So in theory, if the shop's wide enough, you can convert that into 4 shops downstairs and throughout the building, and then you could put 8 flats without planning permission, without troubling the local authority, and you could in theory start that tomorrow. You do not need to even worry the local authority. So actually you could get 8 flats started tomorrow if you had control of that large shop, which I think is a pretty good thing. But just be aware, you must have started your works before 6th of April, otherwise you will be subject to minimum space standards. Right, Class M, which I'm briefly going to go over, which is retail to sui generis, retail or specified sui generis to residential. And when we talk about sui generis here, we're talking about betting shops, loaner shops and laundrettes. But all of these could be used with Class M to go to residential. Again, unfortunately, they are date stamped to the 20th of March 2013, and you are limited to 150 square meters. Again, you've got a 56-day prior approval, and not surprisingly, you can't do this in conservation areas, AONB or listed buildings. I didn't mention any of those on Class G because you can do Class G absolutely anywhere. There are no restrictions. Anywhere within England, you can do it wherever you like, as long as it's ancillary to the shop below, even conservation areas and everything else, or even listed buildings. For obvious reasons, you can't do this in the key shopping area, but if you did do that, you would need to keep a viable shop unit to the front, and then you could perhaps convert the back of up to 150 square meters. Just keep a shop at the front for the street scene and everything else. So 30 square meter shop is generally deemed acceptable for something that's viable. And it's assessed against highways contamination and flood risk. And again, if you are going to do this, please submit your prior approval before the 6th of April. Otherwise, you will need to adhere to minimum space standards, which is generally 37 square meters and above. Class N, which is amusement arcades and casinos to residential, dated to March 2014, again up to 150 square meters. Again, you'll need a prior approval, and again, it's restricted in the same areas, but you can do it in conservation areas. It's assessed against highways contamination, flood risk, and on this one, external appearance. But you can actually submit building works along with Class N as well. And again, you must submit that prior approval before the 6th of April to avoid minimum space standards. It doesn't matter how long it takes to convert, or even how long the application takes. As long as you have submitted that before the 6th of April, you are fine. Class O, which is the one I'm actually doing down in Devon, which is offices to residential, which you'll probably be more familiar with than anything else. Got to be date stamped to the 29th of March 2013. Again, you've got your 56-day prior approval. It's perfectly okay to do it in conservation areas or AONBs. And there's very few areas where it is restricted, but there are a few Article 4 areas where it is restricted, or in listed buildings. You can't do it in those. And it's going to be assessed against highways, contamination, flood risk, and on this case, noise as well. And again, just get that prior approval in before the 6th of April if you do not wish to be subject to that 7 square meters or larger, obviously for more people in it. Right, Class Q, if you've got barns anywhere, barns to residential, dated to the 20th of March 2013. Again, you've got a 56-day, but you can now go up to 865 square meters. So you can go up to a pretty large barn or barns. You can do more than one barn. You don't have to have it on one barn. And you can create up to 5 dwellings. However, you are restricted within AONBs, national parks, listed buildings, and conservation areas. And you're going to be assessed against highways, contamination, flood risk, and a location test. And that's not the location of the barn within the countryside. That's against harmful neighbours. And when we talk about that, we don't mean Farmer Joe living next to the door. We mean stuff like smells and combustible items that may be close by to the barn. Again, the prior approval, if you want to do lower, but realistically, you aren't going to do small properties, I don't think, in Class Q. Now, the important thing about Class Q is you can only do this once per agricultural unit, so up to 5 dwellings. So if you've got 3 or 4 barns, you can still only create up to 5 dwellings. You can't do 5 dwellings in each barn, for example. However, one use class which doesn't get mentioned very often, and in some circumstances you may actually prefer this to a Class Q, and that's Class R, which goes to a flexible commercial use. Now that's date stamped to 3rd of July 2012, so even older. That's eight years, no, almost 9 now, isn't it? Prior approval is 56 days, over 150 square meters. If it's under 150 square meters, you can just go ahead and do it. You just have to inform the local authority that you have gone ahead and done it. You can convert up to 500 square meters. And what can you do almost immediately under 150 square meters? You could convert your barn to a shop, to a financial, to a restaurant, to offices, to storage, to hotels, assembling leisure. So the most obvious one there is probably hotels. So if you've got a barn, say of up to 500 square meters, if you did your prior approval, you could then convert that to a hotel or an apart hotel or something like that where people can stay, which of course is probably the closest we actually get in Class R2 residential. But you know, in my view, service accommodation should all be C1 anyway. But you know that if you can make it into an apart hotel or a B&B or whatever, that sort of thing, then you could probably take advantage of the staycations, as it's called now, that we're probably going to see an influx of over the next few months, whilst people can't actually go abroad for their holidays. However, like other things, you can't do it in an AONB or a national park, and if it's a listed building, forget it as well. It's going to be assessed against highways, contamination, flood risk, and noise. Now, just before we move on to the next part, you will notice earlier on I said about Class E. Well, we are anticipating that Class E, all those uses that I spoke about before, So that's gyms, offices, restaurants, cafes, banks, shops and everything else. We are anticipating at the end of July or beginning of August the ability to convert all of those to residential. There has just been a consultation that's just closed about a week or so ago, and the government is proposing that all of those can actually be converted to residential. So where I've given dates of 2013 in those previous slides, or 2015, I suspect all of those dates will move forward to a date in 2020. So I suspect it's going to be probably early 2020. So if you find any of those uses now in your local towns and villages, etc., that could well go to residential, I would start looking at them now, because once the floodgates open in July, everybody will start, well, as soon as they read any of my sites or any of my groups, they'll be on there to these quickly. So I would start looking now as to options to actually convert those to residential, but we don't know what criteria there are, so we will just have to wait and see as to whether there's any additional restrictions. Right, part 20 is Airspace Plus. Excuse me whilst I just have a quick sip of my tea here.
I thought that was a really good tip, actually, Ian, about looking to convert, what's moving or what's now in Class E, in anticipation of the permitted development legislation being approved.
Yeah, this is going to come in, as I say, this is until the 31st July. This is why during my slides you're mostly seeing still A1, A2, etc., because at the moment, as far as the general permitted development order is concerned, we still refer to those. But Class E is here, and to be honest with Class E, I think the government, you have to bear in mind, this was all introduced at, I would say, at the height of COVID, but we're still in the height, really. But I think it was rushed a little bit, because that's why we have GPs and dentists and stuff like this within Class E. So in theory, you could take your GP surgery and convert that into residential come August, but we'll have to see whether there's any restrictions enforced. But as you can move from one part of Class E to another, I don't really see too many differences. Yes, we will lose Class M and we'll lose Class O from the changes of use, which I've just mentioned. They will go, because they'll then be fully in Class E, and then we'll just be able to convert those straight from that. But bear in mind, you can convert any use Class E to anything else in use Class E, as it's not development. So yeah, just have a look at banks, have a look at restaurants, have a look at restaurants that may not open again after COVID. Were they failing before? Have a look. If you've got local knowledge, then I think it's going to stand you in good stead ahead of an awful lot of other people. And when those floodgates open in, it'll probably be in the may even be 31st July. It could be the 1st of August. We don't yet know really when it will come out, and it will just suddenly get released. We don't even see it early, so it just gets released, and then at that time I have to update about 100 pages on my website, so you can feel sorry for me then. However, right, part 20, construction of new dwelling houses, is what it's officially called, but I like to call it on airspace opportunities. So we have what do we have? 6 different parts here, plus the procedures, plus the definitions of words and phrases even used in part 20. Now I have no idea, and I've not yet come across anyone that can explain as to why ZA comes before A. I don't know. There's probably some reason for it, but I have no idea. But it does it in their listing of letters. So Class ZA is the demolition of buildings and construction of new flats or houses in their place. Class A, which is new flats on detached blocks of flats. Class AA, which is new flats on detached buildings in commercial or mixed use. Class AB, which is new flats on terraced buildings in commercial or mixed use. Class AC, new flats on terraced buildings in use as houses. Class AD, which is new flats on detached buildings in use as houses. And we then have the two definite, or the procedures for doing it, where it's all defined as to all the paperwork you have to supply, or your planning consultant will have to supply, and probably the definitions of words and phrases used in Part 2020. And now these definitions are very important for whoever's given you advice to actually understand. And the reason being is because a terrace, now you will probably, if I asked you as to what a terrace is, you will probably say, oh, a row of 3 houses, row of 4 houses, whatever. Well, actually, as far as this part is concerned, a terrace is 2 or more. So in other words, it is a semi-detached. So that is something that, but if you didn't actually read it and just saw what it says on the headlines, you would just think it's a row of terraces, and that is what it is. Sorry, I apologize, Jonathan. I'm just going to jump back to Jonathan's question. Will Article 4 areas for office residentials become redundant when Class E comes in? Yes, I'm expecting that to happen, and I will actually come on to that in a minute. Like all of Chris's questions, I have a slide that I've already sort of probably preempted that as well. So I will come on to that in a minute, Jonathan. So don't panic. Right. So yeah. So it is important to read the GPDO, and I'm not expecting anyone here to actually read it, to be honest. But it's important for whoever's advising you to actually know it and to do it, because it is very important as to what is in it, and to be honest, what is not in it. That is just as important. If it doesn't say you can't do it in certain areas, like green space, for example, you can do it. You can do it. So green belt, green space, green belt. You can do it in green belt because it doesn't appear anywhere. But again, people assume that you can't. And to assume just makes an ass out of you and me. So please never do that. Right, HMOs. Now, if you're into HMOs, I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you. Part 20, it does not apply to any building that has 1 or more HMOs in it. And if you create flats, perhaps above shops or above offices or anything else, I'm afraid you cannot convert those to HMOs without planning. So I do apologise. It is going to be a problem. So you would, it doesn't mean when you can't get planning, but you can't do it under Class L, which is going from C3 to C4. Now, like anything else in the GPDO, this is assessed against various things, and this is probably assessed against even more things than everything else. Like most things, it's assessed against transport and highways. So it's looking as to where it is in location, perhaps to transport hubs, that sort of thing, or if you've got car parking space, if you've got access from the highway, or indeed conversely, if residents are going to be expected to park on the highways on side roads, then that will be frowned upon. As I said before, it's going to be assessed. These things are going to be assessed against air traffic, and also in these against defence assets as well. So these will all be taken into account depending upon where they are located. As is pretty normal now, contamination and flood risk, and obviously they don't want residents being contaminated from stuff that may actually be beneath them and could be in commercial units beneath. And flood risk, fairly self-explanatory. It's assessed against external appearance and not ugliness. Ugliness, and I saw ugliness mentioned in the news the other day. It doesn't appear. The word doesn't appear anywhere. One person's ugliness is another person's beauty. So, but it will be assessed against external appearance. And like the other elements, resi to commercial, commercial to resi even, you will need natural light to all habitable rooms. So they are living rooms and bedrooms. And impact on amenity space of existing buildings. So if you're going to put, say, a couple of floors of flats above an existing block of flats, then they will be concerned as to how much amenity space the current residents have and whether the new residents moving in will have an impact upon that. And for obvious reasons, overlooking privacy, loss of light is going to be pretty important, and noise from any commercial units. So it impacts the suggestion here, for example, is if the commercial unit downstairs is a noisy one, then that we don't want that affecting residents, so that will be looked upon that. And conversely, they also don't want impacts on businesses. So for example, if you did have a legitimate business downstairs that was noisy, the council probably doesn't want flats going above them where the new residents are going to complain about the business which is operating quite legally down the stairs. So that can have an effect. Right, protected areas. This is quite important for these. Now, you can't do this in what is called Article 2.3 land. And Article 2.3 land, you will often hear just bandied around, or you may hear it. And what that means is conservation areas, areas of outstanding natural beauty, Broads, so that's Norfolk and Suffolk Broads, national parks, and World Heritage Sites. So you can't do any of these, unfortunately, in any of those. You also can't do that in Site of Special Scientific Interest, or as we like to call them, SSSIs, as another acronym. You can't also do it in a listed building or the curtilage of a listed building. Now, it's worth mentioning here that a listed building will apply to the curtilage of that as well. So that will apply to perhaps walls that go around the garden of the listed buildings. And to be quite frank, even a shed in the garden of a listed building could well be protected as a listed building. And certainly outbuildings and stuff like this will probably be restricted and from any sort of demolition or conversion without going through a listed building officer. You also can't do these in a safety hazard zone. That's probably fairly decent. And if you don't like things going bang in the night, then yeah, you can't do it in military explosive storage areas either. I think that's probably going to be like lighting a fuse too far in one of those areas, I think. And if you're within 3 kilometers perimeter of the aerodrome, not 3 kilometers of the middle of it, but 3 kilometers of the perimeter fence, then you're also restricted, and that's more to do with height for obvious reasons. And as I've said before, green belt, nope, you're fine there. Locally listed, nope, you're fine there as well. You can do that in both of those. Locally listed buildings have very few protections at all. They're just listed with the local authority, and they are not listed buildings. So so you can go and convert those without any issues whatsoever. Probably much to the annoyance of a local authority, but that is what the the permitted development says. However, unfortunately, in all these, there are some fees to pay in Part 20, I'm afraid. Unlike the extra floors on a house to make it a larger house, all of these do have fees. Now, if you're doing 50 or less dwellings, and you probably will do, it's £334 per dwelling, which is pretty similar actually to a new build flat or house. If you're going to do over 50 dwellings, then you'll be pleased to know there is a cap on that. It's only 16,500. Oh, plus the £100 per dwelling above 50. Unlikely probably, but it's there. However, you will be pleased to know the government has put a maximum cap on these fees, and that is £300,000. So the good thing is you can't actually go above £300,000 in these fees for Part 20. And I bet you're all now sighing of relief, you know, can't do that. However, I have worked it out. It would mean that you'd have to build on top of some of the thing 29,885 flats. I don't think you're actually going to do that, to be honest. So, but it is there. And to be quite frank, I think someone's just done a cut and paste from newer build properties there. So it's a little bit unrealistic. But hey, that's what Part 20 says of the GPDO. Right, the application for all of these, it is a prior approval, which for the majority of prior approvals, apart from things like demolition, is an 8-week period or 56 days, and they are consecutive 56 days. We do not count weekends, we do not count holidays, we do not count Easter, Christmas, or anything else. It's 56 straight days. Extra time is by joint agreement with yourself and the local authority. However, unfortunately, there is no deemed consent. So if you did a Class O at the moment, which is Office 2 residential, and the local authority did not come back to you within that 56-day period, even if that 56th day happened to fall on Easter Monday, then tough. You can then serve notice to the local authority that you're going to go ahead with your conversion. And there's very little that they can actually do about it. But unfortunately, in Part 20 there's no deemed consent. So after 56 days, you'd either have to take it to an appeal or to agree with the local authority to continue that. And as I mentioned earlier, paragraph B does define in it exactly what you have to do, or more commonly what your planning consultant has to do. But again, all of that is on my website, so I'm not expecting you to actually read it. Article 4, and this answers Jonathan's question from earlier on. An Article 4 takes up to 12 months or more to come in. And to answer Johnson's question, it can't apply to new legislation. That is a critical word, phrase, sentence, whatever it is. They can't apply to new legislation. Okay. Now they also have to be specific. Yeah, I'll get that in a minute. As to what they prevent. So they can't just prevent everything. In the same way, in Article 4, if it prevents an HMO, it will not prevent Class O at the moment, and vice versa. So that is important to understand. Just because you see an Article 4, it doesn't mean you are restricted from whatever you may wish to do in that local authority area. And you'll be glad to know there is now a long procedure for local authorities to actually create one. So even after they've even announced the fact they're thinking of one and gone to a consultation, it can still take another 12 months for it to come into effect. And yes, they do have to give you plenty of warning as to when that's going to come into use. So local authorities do not like Article 4s. Well, they do like Article 4s, but they don't like the restrictions now that the government has placed on Article 4s, and that is to your advantage. And therefore, please do make hay whilst the sun shines. Really do take advantage of it. And yeah, it really is good. So I hope, Jonathan, that has answered your question. The simple answer to that is no. Sorry, is the answer no? The answer is yes. Yes, it will become redundant. I'll get it right way around. It'll be redundant because they don't apply to new legislation. So not a problem at all. Right, we're just going to do one of these. Actually, I'm going to do a couple of these common scenarios, and this is one I actually quite like, because it does give you some opportunities here, and it's probably one of the easier ones within Part 2020. And that is detached light industrial, which is B1C, or research and development, B1D, which is, as I say, B1C or B1E, or you'll know it better now as E. That's all Class E now. And you can actually demolish that and rebuild it as something else. So, for example, going back sort of 6 months or so, we used to have Class PA, which was light industrial to residential, and that was for up to 500 square meters. And quite often people have gone out and they have actually got that planning permission or that prior approval to convert that industrial unit, like the one on the screen, to convert that to residential. Now, all this is contained within Class ZA, which is to demolish, rebuild, and more importantly, add 2 additional stories in it. Okay. The ground floor of this can be up to 1,000 square meters, or if you've got Part 3, or if you had Class PA, sorry, then it was up to 500 square meters. Now, what I'm trying to say here is, if you find a light industrial building with permission to convert that to residential, then look seriously at these, please. Because if you then go back in, you've already got your permission to convert that to residential. So as long as that stacks, then great, happy days. But if you then apply for Class ZA, you could potentially demolish that and convert that to a building of 1,500 square meters. You do not need to enact the existing Class PA, which has up to 3 years for you to actually do the works. You can just forget that if you get Class ZA. And I'm quite sure that a lot of people that have Class PA will not know the gold mine that they're potentially sitting upon, because quite often these are in fairly residential areas, and you may well have high buildings. Okay, you may only be able to go up 1 floor, but you're still doubling your space, because you're going to demolish, so you don't have those conversion costs, and you haven't got costs of perhaps doing the installation, trying to do retrospective installation inside or whatever. You can just demolish it, and you can build up on that footprint. So I like it. I do like it. I really do. The only criteria, it must have been built after the 1st July 1948, and there is a cut-off date of the 31st December 1989. But in reality, most of those are probably already, they are older than that. This also applies to offices, by the way. If you get old offices, you can use that Class ZA there. But I'm just giving you one example of an opportunity, which I think, if you can find these, I think you can probably make some money doing this. I really do. And if I found some, I probably would do it myself, to be honest. Andy has asked, where is the best place to find the current use class of a building you don't own? Well, there is no list, actually, Andy. And I'm just actually going to whilst we are talking, I'm just going to go to my site because I can read it a lot quicker off my site. Just bear with me. Bear with me because I can read it an awful lot quicker because I've actually created a page on this, Andy, doing just this. But essentially, there is no list at all. Don't ask a local authority; they will probably not know at all. Well, they won't know. They'll guess, just as you might do at the moment. Don't, I've said in my article, don't ask a local authority, don't ask a vicar, unless it's a church, and certainly do not ask the planning department. Please don't ask them. It's probably the last people you want to ask anything unless you're doing an application. So I've done some suggestions here. What was a building last used for when it was open? Look at Google Street View. Go back in time. You can do it via the small clock in the top left-hand corner of the screen. Are there any A boards or other signage that will help in that Google Street View? And make a note of the dates when that Google Street View went down. What does the VOA website say? The Valuation Office Agency for business rates. What does that say? Asking neighbours if they can help with it. Can you obtain old leases or other agreements to support your case? Did anyone work there? Try local Facebook groups where people may have been employed in the shop or thing, and they can actually give testimony as to what it was. Was it owned by a public body? If it was, do a freedom of information request. It is your right to know what it was if it was owned by a public body. And then lastly, look at any form of planning applications. However, as I have said earlier on, a planning application does not need to be enacted. Therefore, just because you've got a planning permission to go from one use class to another, it doesn't actually guarantee the fact that use class was actually, that planning permission was actually enacted. So you can't do that. And it's actually also the last legal use. So a good example for that is if you went from, say, if you had an offices and some squatters moved into those offices and used those offices as their main residence, then that is not a legal use, and unfortunately it doesn't become Class C3 as a result of that, I'm afraid. So it's a last legal use of a building. So you do have to be a little bit of a Miss Marple or Inspector Clouseau, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying here. Just to go back in history, do your own due diligence, and try and find out, because there is no list. There is no list, and I will repeat it a dozen times. Do not rely upon apps. Do not rely on anything else. There is no list, trust me. Right, one last thing here. I did cover it earlier, but good example is that sort of detached bungalows that you can see in the picture, which is currently C3. And you could use Class AA of Part 1, which we spoke about a lot earlier, and you could make that into a house, go up by 3.5 meters, not square meters. That'd be rather small, wouldn't it? Or you could use AD in Part 20, so you could make that into two flats. So you could have a flat above and a flat below. It is date stamped, so it's got to be built after the 1st July 1948, and it must have been built before the 5th of March 2018 or the 28th of October in the case of Part AA of Part 1. And yeah, that does create an opportunity, and that bungalow there is actually adjacent to a site that we have just completed on for 14 new build bungalows that we are starting now. That's actually in Westwood Hoe in North Devon. And ironically, that bungalow there, which has been in existence for a little while, they can go up and make them houses, but unfortunately I can't. and mine never will be unless in a few years' time they bring out another revision that actually allows it. So there's a couple of examples. I hope that's been of use for you. Now, don't panic. Absolutely everything I've gone through, and I mean absolutely everything, is on my website, including the questions that I've answered so far. Everything is on there. So if you can't find it, if you can't find it, easiest way is to do it in Google, because my site does come up. It's normally, I mean, if you put Class E, for example, I think I blow all the Class E Jags or whatever they are out of water and all that. So my site is normally first or second at the worst. So always do a Google search. It's probably quicker than mine's internal search, to be honest. But it's far more in depth on there. I've got the entire GPDO pretty much on there. I go into all the extensions and outbuildings, which I spoke about earlier. I also go into SIL, which you may well have in your areas. Fortunately, in my areas, I don't, so I'm quite fortunate in that aspect at the moment. Although there is talk about SIL actually going fairly soon, so that's something else that will alter. Tree preservation orders, there's another acronym for you there, Chris. Listed buildings, conservation areas, some of building regs to go into, and the glossary that Chris mentioned earlier. Probably the largest property glossary anywhere you can find, to be honest. Various articles I've written at all. There's a very good links page as well, so you can go on to the links page, and if you don't know where to find stuff, you don't know how to find roads that don't even exist on Google, I've got some links there to tell you exactly how to find those roads. And yeah, I've got well over 200 pages now, so that's planninggeek.co.uk, and you will see my other sites mentioned beneath each of those slides as well, if they are of interest, including my podcast, Property on Fire. So thanks very much. I hope that was of interest. More than happy to take questions from anybody, and I will leave this screen up for a little while, but you can get hold of me, Twitter, Planning Geek, there you go, Facebook. I've got a Facebook Planning Geek group, and I'm on Instagram, and you'll now find me on Clubhouse as well. So if you're on Clubhouse, which is at the moment only on iOS, so I have to use it on an iPad because I will not have an iPhone. Sorry, I'm an Android person, but I do have an iPad. So you'll find me regularly on Clubhouse. I actually co-host a session every single morning, 7 days a week, from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on Clubhouse, which is a vocal-only platform. Social media has 6 million people on there now, and I'm always happy to answer planning questions whenever I'm on Clubhouse. So if you're on Clubhouse, follow me, find me at Ian Walmsley, follow me. There's a bell, you can go into my profile, read my profile, and every time I speak, you will get notified. And please, if I'm in any of those groups, come and ask me anything on planning, anything at all. I really do not mind. So there we go. Right, Andy has asked, can you convert a residential home to a property with rates for HLSA purposes in a conservation area or AONB? As long as you are holiday let, sorry, I just had to think what HL, sorry, apologies there. Yes, it's the problem is with service accommodation, and let's treat those two separate things, really, to be honest. Holiday lets is pretty much C1. Okay, so and normally it requires some form of breakfast quite often, as far as local authorities concerned anyway. So that is C1, and going from C3 to C1, or going from anything else to C3 or to C1, is going to require planning permission. The problem is service accommodation is not mentioned anywhere in the use class order, Andy, and the problem with that is the fact that a lot of people say it's C3 and will run it perfectly happily, and they seem to be perfectly happy to run it in from a residential, even, believe it or not, converting them to business rates, as I think, actually, to be honest, most uses should be now, or most service accommodation should really be under business rates, because you've currently got a exemption under business rates at the moment, and there are all sorts of grants. And if you want to know more about that, I covered all this on one of my recent couple of episodes ago of Property on Fire. Actually, I covered all this about service accommodation and the business rates and everything else on that as well. But to answer your question, quite simply, if it's to a C3, yeah, you can do it with any of those areas. If you're converting it to C1, then you will need planning. So it really depends on how the local authority sees it. Personally, I think they should be under C1, but many people run them under C3 without any issues whatsoever. And trust me, building control, business rates and planning do not speak to each other. They're like different companies. So
that's what we do, Ian. So we do quite a bit of SA. We've left them all as C3, and most, if not all, are now on business rates. So I think it's a little bit contentious, because sort of C1 hotels, not very many SAs will provide like a breakfast type service. So it tends to, it's sort of arguable either way, I think. C1.
Yeah, it's one of these things, because it's not actually in the use class order. Then it's very, very difficult. It's just not mentioned at all, and so it's an impossible one to answer, Chris. So it is what it is. And I was hoping when the use class order was revised, then we'd have something to do with service accommodation, which perhaps seems to suggest the government thinks it should all be C1. I don't know, but that's what hotels are. Hotels are part hotels, all C1. But yeah, look at business rates, because you can get grants of up to sort of 15,000 or so on it. But again, I did a whole episode of this on my podcast, Property on Fire. I think it was episode 12 actually. So yeah, probably the 26th of January, I think. No, 9th, I'm lying. Episode 11, COVID grants. So yeah, if you don't understand those, if you want to know more, go to that site and download, or go to your favorite app and download those episodes. So any other questions? Thank you, Seamus. Did I work in planning? No, I didn't actually. I didn't. It was all self-taught over the years, because this is how I can tell the opportunities and beat everyone else to the game. But I chose to put together a website. I now speak around the UK and abroad on planning and other stuff. So I enjoy talking. And you would never believe 5 years ago I was as shy as anything. I wouldn't even go into a property meeting, sat outside one, because I was too scared to go in. And you wouldn't believe that if you saw me now. But yeah, it's all mindset and everything else. That's that's the joys of having Rob Moore as a mentor. If you know Rob, So I don't now, but I did then. So but yeah, thanks Andy for your comments. Yeah, we do offer that. I'm not here to sell. I never do selling, to be honest, Andy. So this is always a non-selling thing. But feel free to contact me on my site. Yeah, I do mentoring. I do all that sort of stuff. But that's for another day. So I'm not here to sell, but I appreciate your words. Yes, I'm a developer, Seamus. I do everything else. So yes, it's all. I just enjoy property, to be honest. That's my passion. It makes my blood pump. Hey, Seamus, thank you, but yeah, it's all. I hope it's been of use. But if anyone else has any questions before Chris sort of calls time and kicks us off, then
So it's very good. So Shams has asked a few questions. I sort of remember that Shams is actually located in Wales, and
Right.
So they haven't sort of got the same GDPR.
They don't. Yeah, sorry. I should have. I do apologise. It
right.
probably was on my slide earlier, probably, and I probably should have mentioned that. So I apologise, Seamus.
I'll leave it as how I found it.
Yeah, it does. It does vary a little bit in Wales. Unfortunately, there are some similarities, and there are. But I apologise. Yes, sorry. I should have. That was, you see, I assumed, you see, and that just makes an ass out of you and me, you see. So I assumed that you're all sort of going to be sort of local round St Albans, and the only thing I know in St Albans is a local football club. I used to go there on a regular basis when I was a director of a non-league football club. So I do know that part of the town. But yeah, no, I wasn't there. I wasn't been in planning all my life. I actually used to be a funeral director. I was a third generation funeral director, so you couldn't get too much different to that. Do I think, Jonathan asked, do you think the main residential conversion opportunities coming up are light industrial to residential, stories above? Yeah, I mean, certainly I like, as I said before, that's why I covered that in it, because yeah, I've got slides and I could have gone into all the others. I think that's probably the biggest opportunity. And also I think opportunities where if you walk down your local high street, shopping areas, wherever, instead of looking at your feet and at the pavement in front of it to make sure you don't tread on anything, look up. Yeah, you might tread on something, but it's probably worth it, because look up, look at the different heights of buildings, or do the Google Street View, because when you start looking up, that is when you will see the opportunities, and you really will. So look up, you will see buildings of different heights. So if you see a bank, for example, that has got, that's lower than the offices that have been built over the years next to it, then that is a prime candidate for building on top of and building flats above that bank. And bear in mind, that will be Class E, fairly, it is Class E now, but we expect that to be convertible in some way, subject to certain restrictions to residential, a lot easier than Class M. You may well find great opportunities there. So look up and see where you get different heights on your buildings, and just see where you may be able to get flats, because most of those can be built upon under Class AA. Sorry, Part 2020. And you can go into my website and easily access all of those. gpdo.co.uk will take you quickly to that area. But I think those are the main opportunities. If you start trying to put 2 floors on top of a C3, either as a 4-story house or a house with 2 flats, you are going to come up against a lot of restrictions, I'm afraid. So yeah, that's what I'd say. Thanks, Lewis. Appreciate your kind words. So, any other questions before Chris? I'll let you, Chris, close us off whenever you're ready, my friend. But
well, what I was going to say, Ian, was I mean, Melinda made a point about lots of incredible knowledge, really good, a bit overwhelming for a novice. Now, I think the idea of tonight was for you to open people's eyes as to the possibilities that are around, not necessarily understand all the detail, because people would come to somebody like yourself and say, look, I found this, what do you think? And you would act in that sort of consultation role. So I think you don't actually have to understand everything, because it does get quite complicated. And you do such a good job of explaining it, and what you've been through tonight has been fantastic. What I'm saying is that as property investors and developers, we're not necessarily expected to be great experts in planning,
not at all, or in architecture or building or anything. I can't even put a shelf up, but I've got 40 proper dwellings in construction at the moment. I can't put a shelf on the wall. Trust me, I can't. The wall will fall down. I'm a disaster around DIY. Doesn't stop me from being a developer in the same way as it doesn't stop you, Melinda, from actually being a good person who can take advantage of the opportunities. The information is on my site. My site is always free. Yeah, I do appraisals, and I charge just under £500 do it. But you don't have to do it. It's fine. The information is there free. But it's there for people on it. But go into the site, go onto GPDO, and just have a look. There's a navigation on the left. There's also a navigation at the top. Both does the same thing. And you can just go in and read it. And I've tried to explain each of these in plain English. And quite often, especially when for example, I've got the page on the about which use class, and I'm just actually going to put that into the chat. And of course, I could do that earlier on. I forgot I could do that for you as well. But I've done there, and I try and make it a little bit funny, to be honest, a little bit humorous. Just try and lighten it a little bit, because planning can be dry, it can be boring, but I do try and actually make it a little bit better than that. And that's also where my podcast comes into its own, because anybody can send me a question for answering on that podcast. And if it takes me 20 minutes to explain something, I'll take 20 minutes on my podcast. I really will. It doesn't matter. Let me do the hard work for you, and let me try and explain it to you. So Melinda, if you've got anything, go and send me a message. Send me a tweet at Property on Fire is that one. But you can contact me via any method. To me, I don't mind. And ask me a question, and I'll bring it up on the next podcast.
Thank you very much, Ian. As I said, I mean, I've never been involved in this sort of thing before. I'm quite early in my property journey. I'm currently in Watford, moving west when I sell my house. But no, certainly you've explained it really, really clearly. It's just, I think it's the sheer volume of things to try and take on board. But yes, the fact that you've got 200 pages on your website, obviously.
And trust me, and I'm sorry, I don't know who's, apologies, I can't see my screen, so I don't know who's speaking at the moment, but
Melinda, sorry.
Sorry, Melinda, that's okay, so apologies. Yeah, I mean, look, I literally could go on, and you have to bear in mind, when I present to mentorship groups, I tend to do it I tend to do at least half a day, to be honest, when they're doing day ones. I do it after lunch until sort of close, and even then I've only scratched the surface. So within an hour, it is a whistle stop tour, but there is so much information there. You think, what can I leave out? And it's blimmin' hard to know what to leave out. It really is. So I try and cover most of it, but again, I'm scratching the surface. But trust me, just follow me. Come on to Clubhouse. You're on Clubhouse. Come on there. Listen to me podcast. Ask questions for there, and I promise you, you will not give me a single question that I can't answer. Or if I can't, Dan will get you the answer within seconds. Right. That is a guarantee. I can't recall a question I've not answered before, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, but I am a walking encyclopedia. That's what somebody said. So it's what a mentor said. Somebody, but I enjoy it. I learn by people ask me questions, and I go and find the answers, and then I answer them. I've been doing it for years, so I really don't mind it. So there we go. Anyway, hope that helps, Melinda. Don't give up, Melinda. Keep going. Doesn't matter if you're a novice. You aren't a novice if you're in this group. Trust me, right? And I'm on your WhatsApp group, so just tag me in. So
brilliant, thanks.
That's all right. And replay the recording. I think Chris already said that it's going to make the recording available. Just go and watch it again. You're welcome to it.
So Ian, I would endorse what you said in terms of. I mean, I listened to your Property on Fire podcast. In fact, I listened from the very start because there wasn't really a planning podcast around that I liked, because I looked for them, and there's a few that had started and stopped, and there's a few that broadcast quite infrequently. But yours was absolutely brilliant. So I really like it. I said before, your website is a real great source, and I use it myself. So yeah, and tonight, just for me, cemented the great knowledge that you've got, and I really appreciate you sharing it with the group and taking the time out and the care, but with your presentation to share with us. It's really appreciated. So thank you very much, and your knowledge is sort of second to none, Ian. So that's great.
Could each of you just do me one favour, and that is, could you take a screenshot of the screen at the moment, and just go and share that either tonight or tomorrow on social media, because you will promote Chris and Leis's group, but it's always nice for people to see, and it just helps get the word out there, because I do this for free to all sorts of groups. So if you could do that, I would be most grateful. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Lisa, for the opportunity.
No, that's very kind, Ian. I will just wrap up. We've gone slightly over time, but we'll get so much value from what you were saying, Ian, that I was quite happy to let it run. I would just like to thank Sam again for his lending update, because Sam's here month in, month out, never fails, and always delivers great content. So thanks, Sam. Again, thanks Ian for fantastic content. Really appreciate that. Our next meeting is on Thursday, the 4th of March, and we've got Louise Smith with us. Louise is quite interesting, actually. She spends quite a bit of time working in property, but she also works part-time for Paul McCartney, looking after his horses. So she's quite an interesting individual. She does sort of high-end HMOs with her partner, and she's got a great system for finding deals from estate agents. So I thought she would be a fantastic person to hear from, and she's kindly agreed to talk with us on the 4th of March. If you can, please join our WhatsApp group. Follow Ian on his I can't believe how many channels of social media. I don't know how you look after them all, Ian. Actually, I think you do fantastically well, just doing all that. So well done. I'd just like to close. Wish you all a very nice evening, and we will see you all again next month. Thank you, and special thanks to Ian. Thank you very much. Good night.